The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Most of us sort of kind of know what it is, and of course we know all about the bad press it's been getting lately, like the GW Bridge backups, of course, ordered by political flacks in the Port Authority, or that those political flacks like David Wildstein then resigned after their actions came to light. Port Authority even getting some bad press courtesy of our own Vice President, Mr. Joe Biden, who dumped on LaGuardia. That's a Port Authority property, by the way, saying if you don't know better, the airport felt more like you were in a third world country. But the Port Authority handles a lot more than just that. Its reach, it goes all across the region. The agency runs the World Trade Center, all 7 buildings, including the tallest in the nation, plus the memorial site and the new 9/11 museum. Also, all 6 bridges and tunnels across the Hudson from Staten Island to the GWB. 6 area airports, including Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia, but also Teterboro, Stewart, even the Atlantic City International Airport. Port Authority also runs the downtown heliport, the PATH train, AirTrain system, JFK, Port Authority bus terminal, plus other bus stations at the GW Bridge and Journal Square in Jersey City. And of course, the Port Authority runs, well, ports from Brooklyn to Staten Island and in Jersey City, Bayonne, Elizabeth, and in Newark. The authority is so massive, its revenues top more than almost $4.5 billion a year. And it's all used to work pretty well in the past, or at least that's what people who have studied the workings of the agency say. That is, set up, stopped the local politicians here from gumming up the works with patronage and encouraging interstate cooperation, but that in the 1990s, some allege that under then Republican Governor George Pataki, that's when the traditions began of appointing political allies to positions of power at the Port Authority. Well, few men know more about the Port Authority, or as he'll tell you, anything else, than our own good friend Richard Brodsky. Richard, former New York State Assembly, of course, senior fellow Demos professor at NYU, and joining him on our panel here, Dominic Carter and Andrew Whitman, of course. First off, Richard, we talked about the properties, but the Port Authority, as I know you're going to write in an op-ed piece you're going to see, is a unique entity in that it kind of makes up its own rules as it goes along, right?
It's a Soviet-style bureaucracy, which is the phrase I use for some of the New York authorities. I did a series of investigations of them with subpoenas, other kinds of stuff. And really what you have is an agency that would have gone rogue eventually, no matter Republican or Democrat, didn't matter. And patronage and Bridgegate, as interesting as they are small potatoes. Why, for example, just take the thing that people experience every day, the tolls. The Port Authority, when it raised tolls from $8 to $13, announced it was doing so to pay for the cost overruns at the World Trade Center. Right. It's illegal. So when AAA went to court, they changed their story. If it turns out to be true, and I think it's likely to be true, it means that people across the whole region have been paying essentially for something that they should not have been paying for through their tolls. The notion that they have a geographic boundary, about 20 miles or so from the Statue of Liberty, and they're running Stewart Airport. How did that happen?
And for folks who don't know, it's in Newburgh, New York, up in the Hudson Valley.
They are many things, the least important of which is a port authority. Now, the failures here are failures of government. Its ideas matter, checks and balances matter. We passed a major overhaul of New York's authorities. It worked. The challenge in Jersey is going to be to see if the state legislature can go beyond the Bridgegate stuff.
Explain to us, though, who's in charge from the New Jersey side and the New York side, because one of the things that came out with Bridgegate was you had some folks on the Jersey side that were trying to shut lanes. You had folks on the New York side who said, what the heck's going on? And then there was a standoff. So who's in charge of what?
None of that is in the governing documents. That's all cultural, political, and bad. There should not be a set of geographic fiefdoms with control of the operations of the authority. There are conflicting needs between New York and New Jersey, no question. And those can be worked out through a process that is both political and transparent. But the notion that you have senior bureaucrats who are attached to one state,
so help me out.
They
take in about $4.5 billion a year. Now you saw, we all heard the comments. In fact, if we can play them, this is the vice president talking recently about LaGuardia.
I blindfolded someone and took him at 2 o'clock in the morning into the airport in Hong Kong and said, "Where do you think you are?" They said, this must be America. It's a modern airport. If I took you in blindfold and you took you to LaGuardia Airport in New York, you must think I must be in some third world country. No, I'm not joking.
And a lot of people are nodding along, but here's the part that I found interesting. Okay, we'll agree, LaGuardia, we've all had horror stories. But then it gets announced that you got the Port Authority agreeing with the Vice President, which I thought was a self-indictment, but okay, but that's beside the point, or what Mr. Foy had to say. But then all of a sudden they're going to produce, out of New York's pocket, the money to pay for the fixes.
No.
So wait, what I want to know is who decides how that revenue is spent, and who gets, does the
Because the
state
New York
approve it?
State isn't putting up a penny.
Forget about that for a second. Who approves expenditures when it comes to the Port Authority's revenues?
The board of the Port Authority, which is supposed to act in ways that are consistent with the Port Authority's interests. In New York, we did something, and I don't want to get too lawyer-like, we created a fiduciary duty on the board members. They have to do what's in the best interest of the mission of the entity, not what the governor or the mayor or their political leadership tells them. The Port Authority doesn't have that. So eventually you get self-dealing. You have allegations of a member of the board trying to get a project he was involved with approved as a condition of Sandy Aid. You have a breakdown of a kind where senior bureaucrats think they can cause political problems with the power of the entity. This place is a mess. It is not a mess merely because you like or dislike Chris Christie. These kind of things will happen on both sides of the river until the governance of the authority is fundamentally addressed.
I see you nodding.
I hate to admit,
Don't do
I
it.
hate to admit that I agree with everything Mr. Brodsky had said. From a journalist point of view, you know, I was always taught that when you look at the Port Authority, there's an equal head appointed by the governor of New York and by the governor of New Jersey, and that they basically, there's a Port Authority board, but they basically report to no one. The way I was taught as a journalist in covering them a little bit is that, you know, New York has a little more prestige, but the New Jersey chair runs the authority, but it's a joke. And I mean, one has to wonder, where's their inspector general, if they have one? I'm not even sure. But sometimes you could walk around, to show you how crazy this is, you could walk around Lower Manhattan and see towers of buildings, and oh, that's owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And I'm not talking about the buildings down at Ground Zero, I'm talking about other buildings.
Their mission was to run the port and to deal with cross-border problems. They're now a major real estate developer. They run airports. If you're going to do something like that, you create a Soviet-style bureaucracy with no accountability. These problems are now in the lap of the Jersey legislature, not just to nail Chris Christie or to let him go, but to decide how you want that authority to function and what reforms you
But some
make.
of those missions make sense. I mean, I understand the airports because otherwise you would have New York competing against New Jersey to sort of build a better airport, and there is a
That's a bad
cohesive.
thing.
But there's a cohesive metropolitan area that you need the airports to service all of. Stewart and Atlantic City, I understand that might be a little far afield. I guess my question is, how do you make it run better? How do you set it up? Because it's obviously going to be a political organization. It's going to be appointed.
I'll give you three things you can do.
Please do.
You create in the board members a legal obligation to do the right thing instead of listen to their appointing authority. You create an outside check and balance. In New York, we created the authority's budget office with subpoena power, with investigatory power. The third thing you do is you publish all their data in real time on a website. Their contracts, their personnel, their debt issuance, all of that stuff. You do those three things, which is the heart of what we did in New York in something called the Public Authorities Reform Act, then the Port Authority will dramatically improve, and then we can address these questions of mission and effectiveness in LaGuardia in a much better way.
But here's the question. When somebody says, okay, wait a second. Brodsky just said when they jacked it from $8 to $13 to go over the bridge, who decided that? And you already said that the rationale that they offered up originally was illegal, let alone flawed, and they changed it. But I get why politically nobody wants to raise tolls, and sometimes it's necessary to do so. But where does somebody, I mean, in a business, if you want to increase the cost of something internally, you know, you look at your balance sheet, you look at the revenues, you take in your expenses, and you figure out your next move. Who makes that decision at the Port
board
Authority?
of the Port Authority made that decision.
And do
up-
they inform you when
but
you're in the
up-
legislature
but up-
or only after the fact?
They do not. But they do deal with the governors. And in this lawsuit brought by AAA, AAA has asked to see the emails and correspondence with the two governors. Port Authority won't release them yet, even though the courts told them they had to. So there's a lot more coming that will peel the secrecy back on the Port Authority in things that matter in the lives of people. Tolls may have to go up, but if the toll money is not being used to improve the bridges and the tunnels, but it's being used to pay for a real estate project, we have a right to know that.
Last thing, I know we're up against it, guys, but LaGuardia, for that matter, any of these airports, there is a public interest and a safety issue, and there's also a business issue. Obviously, you're going to try and create, they put in restaurants, they put in amenities to try and get people to spend money here. There seems to be competing interests if the Port Authority is looking out for the safety and well-being of travelers, and also it running on an efficiency model, and at the same time trying to generate as much revenue and keep the cost down. Can you serve
You
two or
can-
three
sure.
masters at the same
they
time?
Do that. They do that in every government institution that has a public safety element. Problem with LaGuardia is the physical plant has been neglected for decades, and they're trying to catch up with a better physical plant. The problems with LaGuardia will only be solved by rebuilding LaGuardia. That costs money, but if you're funding
Yeah.
a new building downtown, you don't have the money to do
And
it.
Richard, I mean, let's be honest. The vice president was right.
Yeah.
If you look at the airport in Paris compared to LaGuardia, which one is better?
What are you doing in Paris?
I'll be honest. You go to Newark. You go to the airport in Newark. Compare Newark here to the LaGuardia. It's
You
amazing.
compare almost any airport outside of New York compared to the New York airports, there's no comparison.
Well, JFK is in pretty
Gotten
good
better.
shape. They're rebuilding Stewart for better or worse.
Half the time, I don't know what language they're using at JFK, to be honest with
Well,
you.
it's an international terminal.
I
man.
know it's international, but we're in America.
No, don't
All
go
right, that's
there.
going to take us in a
Big
whole different
mistake.
fight here.
Big
Now, when
mistake.
we come back from the break here, fascinating behind the scenes. It's not just inside baseball about what's going on with the pre-K fight. And you're going to know a name if you haven't heard it before, Jeff Klein. We're going to try and figure out what's he doing here. We're going to get into that after this. Stay with us.